Hello everyone and welcome back to Java Man Teaches. In today's episode we're going to be talking about arrays and loops in Java. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new project in NetBeans. If you don't know what NetBeans is yet, then please have a look at the previous video that I did. So in NetBeans, to create a new project, it's simple. It's this orange box here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new Java application, and we're going to call it loops and arrays. And I'm going to store it in episode 3. That's fine. And I'm also going to create a new class just called loops and arrays. I'll just give you a bit of an explanation here. If I try and what you saw before there was the package name. I'm just going to install it into the default package, as you can see in this other project. So we'll finish that. I'll close down this so that we don't have to see that one. Okay, so we've got this main class here, and this has all been explained in a previous video of what this class is doing. So an array is a data type in Java, and it's a way of storing collections of data, and any primitive can be created into an array, and any object can be created into an array. And the notation that we use to tell Java that this is an array is the square brackets, and there's already an array on screen here, and it's the argument that gets passed into main. You can see here that it's an array of strings, right? So this square brackets at the end of the string here tells Java that this variable called args is an array of type string. Okay, so firstly, I'd like to say that there is a very good reason why I'm combining this episode of arrays with loops. It's mainly because you would normally always use loops with arrays, because typically you'd want to traverse an array. And I'm going to show you what I mean by this now. So the way arrays work, they're like buckets of information. So if we said we had an array of integers, yeah, and these represented something arbitrary, like I don't know, like the balance for some people. Then the way that they are represented in terms of memory is they are allocated space. So, for example, if you had 100 in the first one, you would have maybe 200, 300, 400, and 500. And you see that these are. It's basically a list of numbers that you are able to access, and it's perfectly valid that you would be able to say, give me item 1, and that would give you 100 back. And you would want to say, give me item 2, and that would give you 200 back, and so on and so forth. Now this isn't quite right, because item 1 in Java, or in programming, everything or arrays begin at 0, so they start at 0. They don't start at 1. So it would actually be, if you wanted item 1, you would pass in the reference 0, and if you wanted item 2, you would pass in 1, because it's always whatever we call it an index, whatever index you want, minus 1, because they always start at 0. Okay, so let's code an example in Java. All I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same example as what I was talking about there. I'm going to create a balance, and I'm going to associate that to a person. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll create an integer array called balance, And this here is a variable declaration, as we've talked about before. Remember that without the assign, it's an uninitialized variable. Yeah, so it will be null. So what we're saying, assign, and then there's a new way of declaring this. Now what we do is we use the new keyword. Because it's a new integer array. Okay, and you'll see it's red, and the reason it's red is because arrays have to be given a size. So we're going to say that it is of size 5 in this example. Okay, and we're going to do the same, but we're going to do for a string. So we're going to say string array people assign new string array. It's length of 5. That's it. So now we have two buckets which are the same size, which means that we can assume that the value of people in position 0 in our string array corresponds to the balance in position 0 in the balance array. Okay, and these have no information in at the moment. If we try to have a look and see if we try to have a look and see what was in position 0, it'd be null. There'd be nothing in there. So in for the string array, and for the integer array, it would be 0, because everything is integers are 0 initialized in Java. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign a value. So we're going to say balance, and we're going to use the same construct here of the square brackets, but we're going to say 0. And what that's saying is balance, but specifically position 0 of balance, assign 100. Okay. So I'm saying item 0 in the balance array, give it the value of 100. Equally, I could say balance position 1 equals 200. And what we're seeing is now that balance will look something like this. Yeah? Because they are, if I've not given them a value, they'll be 0. Okay. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to give some values into people. So we're going to say people position 0 assign Bob, and people position 1 assign Jane. Okay, so all we've done here is we've initialized some values into our arrays, and you'll see that they're yellow here, and that's because it's telling me that I only ever write to these arrays. I never read from them, so there's no point in what I'm doing because I'm never using my values. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use them, and in NetBeans there's a really shorthand for doing the system.out.println statement, and that is to type in s out and press tab. So s out tab, and that will give me the system.out.println for me. Okay, I'm not going to do quotes for now. All I'm going to say is I want to print out people item 0 first. Okay, and if I run this, I get Bob. Okay, if I change that to people 1, I get Jane. Okay, so people position 0, if I want to give it a bit more meaning, I can do what we call string concatenation, and that is to take a string and add more string to it. So other values to this string. So, and you can do this using the plus notation. So I'm going to give it a string and a space, and I'm going to say, so this people index 0, which is Bob, so Bob has, and I'm going to put a pound sign, I'm going to say plus balance 0. And what this is going to print out is Bob has £100. Okay. Now I'm going to grab this and I'm just going to copy it underneath, and I'm going to change the index to be 1 and 1. Okay. And you'll see now that I have Bob has £100, Jane has £200. Okay. Now that's fine. We've still got more space in the array, so let's go and fill it up. So if we were to say, that 2, 3, and this is the final element, 4, yeah. So we now have a full array there, and I have to think of some more names now. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. See, what would happen here is if I try to assign 6 here, I can't, because this index doesn't exist. So I'd get an index out of bounds exception. I can show that to you now, actually. But let's say Bob, Jane, Jack, Sam, Andrew. And this one is going to be, this is going to throw out our, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one should be 5, but it's position 6. This one's going to be the person that breaks our code, so we'll call this person Lee. So if I run this, you'll see I get this error, which is an array index out of bounds exception. Okay, and it's telling me 5. Yeah. And NetBeans is also pointing to the line that happened on. It says loops and arrays.java line 34, and I can click on that and it'll highlight that line. So if I do that, it'll highlight this line. It'll say you're trying to access position 5, yeah, but I've only got 5. My array is only the length of 5, so position 5 or index 5 doesn't exist. It's an index out of bounds. Yeah. Equally, if I try to do -1, that also it doesn't exist. -1 doesn't exist. You can never have -1 in an array, or any negative number. So there we go. So this now we've created our construct. If I run it, we'll get the exact same output as before because we're not actually using these yet. So let's use these. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll grab these 2, 3, 2, 3, and 4. Now what we're going to see is this. Bob is 100, Jane is 200, Jack is 300, Sam is 400, and Andrew is 500. See? So what you might notice here is that we've got a lot of repetition. We have actually the same code over and over and over. Yeah, we've got repetition here. With some variations, we've got, okay, this is some repetition here. This is just incrementing by 100 all the time. This we've got repetition as well. This we've certainly got repetition. This is literally the same statement. So what we can do is we can simplify these. Okay, and to do that we just write a loop. Okay, And a loop is something which will just execute over and over and over and over the same bit of code until a given parameter means it stops. Okay? So we'll explore that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new loop here. Okay? And in Java, we've got a few different types of loops. Okay? And I'll give you an example. The first example I'll give you is probably the simplest, and that's a while loop. Okay? And while is a keyword in Java, that's why it's appearing as blue. And the while loop looks like this. Okay? I'll say some condition. And I'll explain this. So all it's going to do is it's going to execute this block of code while this condition is true. Okay? And I'll give you an example of a condition. If we had an integer here called count and it was 0, we could say while count was less than, we could be very literal and say 5. While count is less than 5, loop. Okay. If I just comment out this code down here, and I said loop. Now, what do we think is going to happen? I'll pause here while you try and think what's going to happen in this case. Okay. Okay, so you have an idea of what may happen in this case. So let's see, and I'll show you. If we run that, it's going to loop forever. Okay, because count is always going to be less than 5 because it's never not 0. I'll stop that so it doesn't crash my computer. Count is never lower than 0, and that's called an infinite loop because the condition will never change and it will never be true. It will never resolve to true. That's an infinite loop. So what we have to do is we have to modify count at least. We have to say here count, well, we have to say increment it by 1, and we could do that by saying count equals count add 1, or there's a simpler way and we can say count plus plus. And this just says increment it by 1. Okay. Now if we do it, when we run it, we get the right number of loops. We get 5. Okay. So starting at 0 and saying less than 5, if you think about it, will always produce 5 elements. If you start at 1, so sometimes you may want to start count at 1 and still want 5 elements. You have to change this to an equals, less than or equal to, and you will still get 5, okay? But traditionally you would start at 0 because arrays normally only start at 0. And the other thing that we can say here is, remember, we have access to count. So we can say, well, what is count? So if we have a look at it, count is 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, conveniently, we have just reproduced these numbers in a loop. The only other thing that's left to reproduce is these numbers. Okay. So why don't we go and do that? We could, of course, have another variable here which says balance, and it starts off at 100. Fine. Oh, we can't call it balance because we've already declared it balances. So we'll call it balance. We'll call it loop balance. Okay, and this is what we're going to use in our calculation. And we could, of course, say balance equals balance plus 100. Fine. Of course, that's fine. Oh, no, sorry. we could say loop balance equals loop balance plus 100. Oh, and what we'll get is, I'm just going to concatenate this again with some strings. We're going to say loop balance. And I'll run that, and I get the numbers that I want. Now, this isn't great because we're creating another variable here. So maybe there's an easier way that we can do this without the need for this. Well, yes, there probably is. We can just write a little bit of maths to achieve what we want. We can say, if we do it in brackets, it makes it easier. We can say count plus 1 times 100. And that should give us the same result. And now we've only got one variable. Great. So that's a while loop. Okay. There is a variation on the while loop, and that's called a do while loop. And the difference between a do while loop is the while comes at the end. Okay. And what happens is you have a do and a while here. Okay. And now what this is going to do, well, I'll just run it. This is going to do the same thing, but let's say that count was never lower than 5. Count was 7. What do you think is going to happen now? Well, it's going to run once. As opposed to, if I flip it around again, let's see what happens if I do it the other way. It will never run. Yeah? A do while loop guarantees an execution for the first run. It will always execute this once, and then it will see if it needs to do it again. And it will go and do it again, go and do it again, until this statement becomes not true. Okay. So sometimes there are very good use cases for do while loops, but a lot of the time you would stick to a while loop, because a lot of the times you wouldn't want it to do it twice. Okay, and I'll re-put that as 0 there. There is another loop, and this is probably the most common loop, I would say. So in my experience, this is the one I probably use most, and this is called a for loop. Okay. And what I'll do for the moment is I will comment that out. Okay. So what happens in a for loop is we say for, and it takes in some arguments, and it has the execution block. Okay. And it takes in, what I'm going to do is, we want the same result here as what we had here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename that as I, and rename that as I. Because, and I'll explain why I'm doing that in a bit. So what we want is we want to reproduce the same result, and we can do it in a little bit more compact form. It's mainly just to make the code a bit shorter. Okay, so what we can say is we've got an integer here called I, and we're going to initialize it to 0. Then we're going to put a semicolon. Then we're going to say this is now going to be our condition. Okay, and we're going to say, well, I is less than 5. And then we're going to say we've got an action to do. Yeah, that's going to be I++. Now if I run this, we get the exact same result, but we've got much less code here. We don't have to manage the variable. Well, we do, but we don't have to do it outside or inside the loop construct. It gets done all in the declaration of the loop. So what you've got is, the first thing that happens is this gets called, okay? So it creates a variable called I, and the reason it's I is tradition that it always starts with I. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. And if you've got a nested loop, so if you've got another for loop inside that, it becomes J, and if you've got another one in that, it becomes K and L and so on and so forth. There is perfectly it's perfectly valid to call this count as long as you remember to increment all of these, to change all of these. You can run it again, absolutely fine. There's no reason why you can't do that. But traditionally, this is always called I. So what we're going to do is going to create a new variable called I, and then it's going to execute this block. So it's going to print line this, and then it's going to go, is I less than 5? Yeah. And it's going to go, yes it is. So now let's increment this. And then it will do the whole thing again. So then it will run the block, then it will check, and then it will increment, run the block, check. And if it is lower, then it will increment. If it's not lower, it will exit, and it will carry on processing this. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll use the for loop to produce the output that we wanted. Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll use, thinking about it, probably better, we'll use two different loops to initialize our data. These here. Strings are a little bit more difficult to initialize, so we'll leave that like that for now. There is actually an easier way. I'll do that in a bit. But for now, what we want to do is we want to recreate this. So we'll use the while loop to recreate that. Okay. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say balance count equals, and then this construct here. Oh, I've got a bracket that's not needed there. Okay, so we're initializing our array here, which is completely fine. And then what we want to do is we want to print out our array. So I'll have to move this up because otherwise, if I don't do that, it will break. Yeah. So coding really is trying to make your code as short as possible. Really, you want to make it as efficient as possible. So doing things with loops is a much better way than having to type it all out by hand, and it becomes so much easier to maintain as well. So what we'll do is we will say people I has balance I. And it's so easy, and we'll print that out. And what we get is Bob has 100, Jane has 200, Jack has 300, Sam has 400, Andrew has 500. Perfect. We still have this block here. Now strings are not as easy to reproduce because we don't really have an algorithm that we can do for that. But if we had, let's say, a CSV file, we could read that in. But we don't have that for now. But we can certainly simplify this code block to make it a little bit easier to read or basically in less lines of code. So what we can do is get rid of that. And here we can use the curly brace notation, and we can say Bob, comma, Jane, comma, Jack, comma, oops, sorry, Sam, comma, and Andrew. And there we go. And there's no comma for the ending. And that is a declaration of an array without having to give it a type. What it's going to do is it's going to do all this stuff for you, and it's going to write all these values into the array. It goes and does that. So this is a nice way of doing it if you've got a defined list that you want to use. So if we run that again, we get the same output. But now what you'll notice is that our code is much more condensed. There's a sorry, 2 seconds. There's a thing in NetBeans where you can format your code, and that will make it look pretty and tidy. What you'll see is that our code is much more condensed. We can, of course, condense it even further by using a for loop instead of a while loop. But this is a nice way to show the different types of loops. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and condense that. So that means that we can do that. We don't need that anymore. We don't need the incrementation anymore. And of course we have to change count to I, and that's all we have to do. If we run that, we get the exact same output. And we've now got a class which is 32 lines of code, whereas earlier in the lesson we started out and it was upwards of like 60 lines. So we've got a much more condensed class, and it's much easier to read as well, because we can see that there's a loop, it's looping through an array. And the other thing it does, so the other thing that we're doing here is we're giving it a literal. Now picture this, okay? This changes. This now goes to 7, right? And we add another 2 people on here. We now have to go and change this to 7 and this to 7. That's very laborious. So instead what we can do is arrays have various properties on them. So we can say balance.length. And we can say balance.length. So now, no matter what the size of balance is, it will always print out the right thing. Now, of course, if you're doing this, it's going to throw an exception here because people is not the same size as balance. So that's the only risk here. If we run this, it's going to iterate through our array, and when it gets to this point, it's going to say, "Oh, hold on, I don't have this person." Okay. So all I'll do is I'll add it. Oops, using the wrong constructs myself now. Andrew, I'm going to add in Lee, and I'm going to add in Frank. There we go. So we've got 2 extra people. When I do that now, Frank is now the richest person. He has £700. Lee is second. He has £600. So on and so forth. So that's a very simple. I've got also a stray semicolon there. That's a very simple way of showing how loops work and how arrays work in Java. Okay, so I really hope that you enjoyed that video. I hope that it was helpful to you. If you've got any questions about how these kind of things work and more kind of practical examples, then please leave a comment below. If you found this video helpful, then please give it a like. And if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, then please hit the subscribe button. And also, when you do hit the subscribe button, please make sure that you register for notifications, because then when I upload stuff, you'll be able to see them. Thank you for watching. So until the next video, goodbye.